A bipartisan delegation of U.S. senators will travel to China next week. Their trip follows high-level visits from 4 Biden administration officials in recent months. The visit comes amid a time of persistent disagreement over policies concerning Taiwan, the South China Sea, and semiconductors, and what the U.S. calls genocide of the country's Uyghur population. With no clear end to those tensions in sight, the U.S. has been shoring up relations with other countries in the region, like South Korea and Japan, where the senators will also make stops. For more, let's bring in Patrick Cronin. He's the Asia-Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute, a research organization based in Washington. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. So let's just, as a preliminary procedure here, give us your sense of where things stand with the U.S. and China after all of these visits. What's the state of the relationship in basic form?
Well, we're at a critical period. In the next couple of weeks, Xi Jinping is going to decide whether he wants to come to Washington and whether President Biden wants him to come to Washington for the first face-to-face summit meeting in Washington between Biden and Xi. They met last year in Bali, Indonesia, on the margins of a big multilateral forum. And that while they've talked to each other over the years, they really have had very frosty and fragile relations. Those relations were blown off course, obviously, with a spy balloon earlier this year. Those senior level meetings have put it back on track to some extent. Wang Yi, their top diplomat, is coming to Washington here this month to see whether they have a deal and can be assured of a success for Xi and Biden.
And Patrick, what's your feeling about, there's always a debate about how tough politicians are rhetorically with China, how much China, a country that values face and being approached with a certain amount of respect, how much engagement is necessary. What's your sense of that mix and how this trip of senators would play into that way of participating in diplomacy with China?
Well, so much of the competition with China has now been institutionalized in congressional legislation. Think of export controls or think of sanctions for human rights issues. So it's critically important for Majority Leader Schumer and a Republican, Senator Crapo and the others on this delegation to assure the Chinese that while they're going to be tough on China, they're going to be fair, and that Xi Jinping can walk away from a summit in Washington knowing that the relationship is in a better position even while the competition is still fierce.
One of the things that the senators want to talk about is the fentanyl crisis. And what's your sense of how that gets addressed and China's role in contributing to that problem?
Well, the Trump administration was cooperating with China back in 2019 when Chinese agreed to say this was a controlled substance, but we haven't got the opioid epidemic in check yet. 90% of the fentanyl coming into the United States is sourced from China. There have been indictments being handed down on many occasions in the last few months because of Chinese entities and individuals dealing online with precursors of fentanyl. So we have to have some kind of a drop in the death rate of overdoses in America for that trust to go up. That's going to take much longer than preparations for this summit. So hopefully they can at least turn the corner on this crisis.
And now, finally, the economic climate. Things are a little bumpy in the Chinese economy. Does that provide an opportunity or an area of sensitivity for either the Biden administration or these senators in terms of trying to sort of stabilize that relationship with China on the economic front?
It is the biggest incentive. We're still doing $750 billion in goods and services every year trading between China and the United States. That's a big incentive, even if there's a big deficit for the U.S. Xi Jinping needs to get out of the economic stagnation that he is now in. And while there are increasing questions whether his political repression approach is the right way to get economic growth, maybe they can agree on something to allow for more stability in two-way trade.
Patrick Cronin, Asia-Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.